a mail-order husband came to save a widow's ranch. But her dark secret changed everything. Clara Hayes stood at the edge of the porch, staring at the dusty trail that led up to the ranch. The wind swept across the open fields, carrying with it the faint smell of hay and earth. The sun was low in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of gold and pink. It was a beautiful sight, but for Clara, beauty couldn't hide the weight pressing on her shoulders. Ever since her husband had passed, the Hayes ranch had been falling apart. Bills piled up on the kitchen table, fences were broken, and the livestock needed more care than she could manage alone. Some days, she wondered if she would have to sell the ranch, the only home she had ever known. It had been 3 years since Jacob's sudden illness took him from her. Clara still remembered the cold feel of his hand in hers, the way he had smiled weakly and whispered that she would be strong enough to keep everything going. At the time, she had nodded, trying to believe him, but now, each day felt like a battle she was losing. She had always been independent, capable of handling a lot on her own, but the ranch required more than just strength. It needed a partner, someone who could help shoulder the responsibilities, someone who understood the land. Desperate and unsure of what else to do, Clara had done something she never thought she would. She placed an advertisement for a mail-order husband. The idea had seemed strange at first, even a little frightening. But in her heart, she told herself it was practical. She needed someone reliable, honest, and willing to work hard. Someone who could help save her ranch from financial ruin, and maybe, just maybe, bring a little warmth back into her lonely life. She hadn't expected anyone to respond so quickly, but when Ethan McAllister's letter arrived, she felt a flicker of hope. Ethan's letter was polite, straightforward, and careful, just the way Clara liked things. He wrote about his work on his family's farm in the Midwest, about his experience with horses and cattle, and his desire for a fresh start. He mentioned that he was looking for a serious partnership, not just a temporary arrangement. Clara read and reread his words, weighing every sentence. There was something honest in the way he expressed himself, something that made her feel he might actually be trustworthy. When the day finally came for Ethan to arrive, Clara was nervous in a way she hadn't been in years. She had cleaned the small guest room until it shone, fixed the old fence near the driveway, and even baked a fresh loaf of bread, though she hadn't baked in months. She paced the porch, watching the dirt road for any sign of a carriage or rider. When she saw him in the distance, a tall man with broad shoulders and a steady stride, her heart skipped a beat. He carried nothing but a small satchel, yet he walked with a confidence that made him seem larger than life. Ethan approached slowly, tipping his hat politely as he came closer. Clara felt a mix of relief and tension. He smiled, a kind smile that reached his eyes, and said, "You must be Mrs. Hayes. I'm Ethan McAllister. It's a pleasure to meet you." His voice was calm and reassuring, the kind of voice that could make a stranger feel like an old friend. "You must be—" "Ethan," Clara replied, offering her hand. She felt a little foolish, standing there like a schoolgirl, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Welcome to the Hayes Ranch." The first few days were awkward. Clara and Ethan worked side by side, repairing fences, feeding the animals, and checking on the crops. Clara was careful, watching him closely, testing his skills and his patience. Ethan, in turn, observed her routines, learning the rhythms of the ranch and how she managed everything. He asked questions, not because he doubted her, but because he genuinely wanted to understand. There was a quiet intelligence to him that Clara found reassuring. Despite her initial reservations, Clara noticed small things about Ethan that made her feel a little lighter. He laughed easily when a horse spooked and nudged her gently to move out of the way. Ah. He carried firewood without complaint. even when the load was heavy. And, perhaps most surprisingly, he didn't ask prying questions about her past or her late husband. He accepted the ranch and her as they were. Yet, Clara's heart remained guarded. She had been hurt before, and losing Jacob had taught her that life could change in an instant. Trust didn't come easily anymore. She reminded herself that Ethan was here for work, not companionship. Still, she couldn't deny the curiosity that bubbled up inside her. Who was this man really? What had driven him to leave his home and answer a mail order ad? And, most importantly, could she allow herself to let someone else into her life again? Ethan, too, felt the tension. He had seen the way Clara carried herself, strong, determined, and fiercely independent, but he also sensed the loneliness hidden behind her eyes. He respected her space, never pushing too hard, never overstepping boundaries. In the quiet moments when they worked together in the fields or sat on the porch after a long day, he found himself admiring her resilience. He could see the weight she carried, and he wanted to help, not just with the ranch, but with the burden she bore in her heart. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, routines became rhythms. Ethan rose before dawn to check the livestock, while Clara prepared breakfast and planned the day's tasks. They repaired fences together, tended the garden, and fixed broken tools. The ranch began to feel alive again, the way it had when Jacob had been there. Clara noticed the difference immediately. Crops grew stronger, animals were healthier, and neighbors began to drop by more often, curious about the new man helping run the ranch. Still beneath the surface, a quiet tension lingered. Clara's dark secret, the mistake she had made years ago, the truth she had buried deep, remained unspoken. She feared that if Ethan knew, he might leave, or worse, that the whole town would turn against her. She kept it hidden, even from herself at times, burying the guilt beneath endless chores and long nights of work. Ethan, perceptive as he was, began to notice the small cracks. Clara would flinch at certain questions, pause before answering, and sometimes disappear into the fields alone for hours. He didn't press her, but he felt the pull of the mystery. He wanted to earn her trust, to be someone she could confide in, but he also understood that trust could not be forced. It had to grow, slowly, naturally, like the crops they tended together. One evening, after a long day repairing a broken barn door, they sat on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The air was warm, filled with the scent of hay and the soft sounds of animals settling in for the night. Clara handed Ethan a mug of tea, and they sat in companionable silence. For the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to relax, to feel that maybe, just maybe, life could be a little brighter with Ethan here. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes on the horizon. "For everything." Ethan nodded, taking a sip of his tea. "I'm glad to help. That's what I'm here for." His voice was steady, reassuring, but there was a gentleness to it that made Clara's chest tighten. She looked at him, noting the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the easy way he carried himself, and she felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. For a moment, they were just two people watching the sunset, two people sharing a space that had been heavy with grief and responsibility. The ranch was still a challenge, the debts still looming, but for that moment, it felt possible that they could face it together. As night fell and stars began to appear in the sky, Clara went inside to lock the doors and tend to the animals one last time. She paused in the doorway, looking back at the porch where Ethan had been sitting. He had moved inside as well, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a fragile, tentative connection that neither could define yet, but both felt. Clara climbed the stairs to her small bedroom, exhausted but strangely hopeful. She knew the days ahead would not be easy, There would be challenges, disagreements, and difficult decisions, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of possibility. Maybe, with Ethan's help, the Hayes Ranch could survive. Maybe she could survive too. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust again. The mornings at the Hayes Ranch had begun to take on a rhythm, a quiet routine that gave Clara a small sense of peace. Each day she rose with the sun, her body still tired from the long hours, but her mind sharper than it had been in years. The ranch was coming alive again, not just from the work she and Ethan did together, but from the sense that something larger than herself was being rebuilt. The fences that had once sagged now stood strong, and the fields were beginning to flourish again. There was a quiet satisfaction in seeing the results of their labor, and even though Clara still worried about money and the future, she felt a little more hopeful. Ethan had become a constant presence, though Clara never let herself take that for granted. He worked tirelessly, often rising before she did to check on the livestock and make sure the horses had clean stalls. Clara noticed how he paid attention to the smallest details: the water troughs, the condition of the soil, even the mood of the animals. His diligence impressed her, but it was his patience that surprised her most. He never rushed her or criticized her methods. Instead, he offered suggestions gently, as if he understood that she needed to feel in control. It was during these long mornings that Clara began to notice the small changes in herself. She laughed more easily, even if it was just a quiet chuckle at Ethan's dry sense of humor or the antics of a stubborn cow. She felt less lonely, and in the evenings when the sun dipped low and the work was done, she found herself lingering on the porch longer than usual, hoping to catch a few words with him before he retired to the guest room. Yet, despite this growing sense of companionship, Clara's secret remained a shadow she could not shake. She had tried to bury it beneath chores, under the endless work that the ranch demanded, but it lingered in her thoughts like a storm waiting to break. There were moments when she caught Ethan looking at her with curiosity, and she feared he might sense the truth before she was ready to tell him. Every time she hesitated or changed the subject, a part of her wondered if she was pushing him away without meaning to. Ethan, for his part, noticed the subtle shifts in Clara's mood, but he never pressed. He had a quiet understanding about people, an empathy that Clara had not expected. He could tell when she was troubled, and instead of forcing her to speak, he simply offered his presence, a steadying force in her life. There were times when they worked together in the barn, repairing tools or mending fences, and he would catch her staring off into the distance, lost in thought. In those moments, he didn't ask questions. He simply continued working, letting her process her own thoughts in her own time. One afternoon, a neighbor, Mrs. Larkin, came by to check on the progress at the ranch. She was a small, lively woman with sharp eyes and a kind heart, who had known Clara since she was a child. "It's amazing what you've done here," Mrs. Larkin said, her voice full of admiration. "I hardly recognize the place. And this young man of yours," she added with a smile, "he seems to know what he's doing." Clara felt a warmth spread through her at the praise, but also a pang of nervousness.
"Yes," she said cautiously, glancing at Ethan, who gave a modest shrug. "He's been very helpful."
"I'm lucky to have him."
Ethan nodded politely, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's a pleasure to help," he said simply. Mrs. Kahn sighed. Larkin lingered for a while, asking questions about the crops, the animals, and the repairs. Clara answered carefully, conscious of the image she wanted to present. She didn't want anyone to suspect the challenges she had faced or the mistakes that still haunted her. When Mrs. Larkin finally left, Clara felt both relief and a strange sense of pride. She had managed to maintain appearances, but more importantly, she had done it with Ethan by her side. The days continued, each one blending into the next with a mix of labor and quiet reflection. Clara... He knew which tasks to take on without being asked, and she began to trust him in ways she had not trusted anyone since Jacob's passing. They shared meals together, simple fare of bread, cheese, and roasted vegetables, and occasionally Ethan would tell stories of his life back in the Midwest. He spoke of wide-open fields, long winters, and the lessons he had learned working alongside his family. Clara listened with fascination, sometimes laughing at his anecdotes, other times simply nodding, absorbing the details of a world she had never known. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Ethan spoke quietly. "I've always liked the quiet," he said, his eyes on the horizon. "It gives you time to think, to figure out what matters most." Clara nodded, feeling a twinge of longing in her chest. "Yes," she replied softly, "but sometimes it's hard to think when you carry so much with you." Ethan glanced at her, noticing the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. He didn't press, but his gaze was steady, full of understanding. Clara felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, a trust she had not felt in years. It was a fragile feeling, but one she wanted to nurture. As the weeks passed, Ethan's presence began to change the ranch in subtle ways beyond the physical repairs. The animals were healthier, the fences stronger, and the fields more productive. But there was also a change in the air, a sense that life could be lighter and more hopeful. Clara began to see the possibilities again, imagining a future where the ranch could thrive, where she could be happy, where the mistakes of the past didn't define every day. Still, her secret remained a constant shadow. There were nights when she would sit alone in her bedroom, staring out the window at the moonlit fields, and wonder if she had made a mistake in letting Ethan into her life. What would happen if he discovered the truth? Could he forgive her, or would he leave just like so many others had in the past? The fear gnawed at her, but she forced herself to focus on the work at hand, on the small victories they achieved each day. Ethan, ever perceptive, began to notice these moments of hesitation. There were times when Clara would suddenly stop mid-sentence, her eyes distant, her hands trembling slightly. He didn't question her directly, but he offered small gestures of support, a hand on her shoulder, a quiet word of encouragement, a plate of food left by her door when he knew she was too tired to come to the kitchen. These simple acts built a foundation of trust, even if Clara herself wasn't ready to fully acknowledge it. One particularly difficult day, a sudden storm swept across the ranch. Heavy rain and strong winds threatened the crops and made the fences vulnerable. Clara and Ethan worked tirelessly, moving livestock to safer areas, reinforcing weak sections of the fencing, and covering tools to prevent damage. By the time the storm passed, they were drenched and exhausted, but the ranch had survived. Sitting on the porch afterward, wrapped in blankets and sipping warm tea, Clara looked at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she admitted softly. Ethan smiled, a quiet warmth in his eyes. "We make a good team," he said simply. "The ranch and everything else." Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. It was the first time in a long while that she felt a sense of companionship, not just someone helping with the ranch, but someone who understood her, who could stand beside her through challenges, someone she might even trust with the truths she had hidden away. Over time, small moments of connection began to blossom between them. They shared quiet breakfasts before the sun rose, laughed over spilled feed, and found comfort in the steady rhythm of shared labor. Clara discovered that she could be herself around Ethan without pretending or hiding her exhaustion. She didn't have to be the perfect rancher, the perfect widow, or the perfect host. She could simply be Clara, and he would accept her. Yet, the shadow of her secret never fully disappeared. She knew that sooner or later she would have to confront it, and she feared the consequences. But in the meantime, she allowed herself to savor the small joys of the present, the laughter, the quiet evenings, the simple satisfaction of seeing the ranch thrive once more. Ethan, too, felt the slow but steady pull of something more than work or companionship. He admired Clara's strength, her resilience, and the way she cared for the land and the animals. He could sense the pain she carried, but he also saw the hope that had begun to return to her eyes. He wanted to be there, not just as a helper, but as someone she could lean on, someone she could trust, someone who could help her carry the burdens she had shouldered alone for so long. And so, life at the Hayes Ranch continued, a delicate balance of work, companionship, and unspoken understanding. The ranch was slowly coming back to life, and with it, the possibility of a future that Clara had not dared to imagine. The trust between her and Ethan was growing, fragile but real, a bond built on patience, respect, and shared effort. Even with the shadow of her secret looming over her, Clara began to allow herself to believe that perhaps, with Ethan's help, the ranch and her life could survive. Perhaps, even, she could learn to trust again. The Hayes Ranch had never looked better. The fences were sturdy, the fields green and thriving, and the animals healthy and well-fed. The work Clara and Ethan had done together had transformed the property into something resembling the ranch it had once been under Jacob's care. Neighbors who had long assumed the property would fall into disrepair now stopped by to comment on the progress, some offering congratulations, others sharing stories of their own struggles. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself a sense of pride in what she had accomplished. Ethan had become more than just a helper. He was a partner. They moved through the ranch in a comfortable rhythm, often working side by side without words, yet understanding what needed to be done. He anticipated her actions, helped without being asked, and even offered quiet advice when it was needed. The presence of another adult in the ranch made the work feel lighter, even when the days were long and the tasks exhausting. Despite this progress, a subtle tension had begun to grow beneath the surface. Clara's secret, her past mistake, the decision she had made years ago, loomed over her like a shadow she could not shake. She had carried it for so long that it had become part of her daily thought, tucked between worries about finances and ranch duties. But now, with Ethan so close and involved in every part of her life, the secret felt heavier, like a stone she could no longer carry alone. She tried to push it aside, focusing on the work at hand. She reminded herself that Ethan was here to help save the ranch, not to judge her past. Yet, small moments reminded her that the truth might not stay hidden forever. She flinched at certain questions, avoided eye contact when discussions touched on her family or past decisions, and sometimes retreated to the fields alone to gather her thoughts. She knew she could not hide forever, but the fear of losing everything, the ranch, her reputation, and perhaps even the growing bond with Ethan, kept her silent. Ethan, meanwhile, sensed the tension. There were moments when Clara's smile faltered, when her hands trembled slightly, when her voice grew tight as she answered a simple question. He did not press, respecting her space, but he could feel the weight she carried. He wanted to help, not by forcing her to speak, but by showing her that she could trust him. He believed that one day she would tell him what was troubling her, and when that day came, he would listen without judgment. One afternoon, the quiet life of the ranch was interrupted by a visitor. Mr. Ranchow. Carmichael, a neighboring rancher with a reputation for gossip, arrived unexpectedly. Clara had always kept her distance from him, wary of his nosy nature and sharp tongue. He greeted them with a friendly smile, but Clara sensed the curiosity in his eyes. "Heard you been busy," he said casually, glancing around at the freshly repaired fences and healthy livestock. "The place looks almost new. Quite an improvement." Clara nodded politely.
Thank you, Mr. Carmichael.
"It's been a lot of work, but worth it." Ethan stepped forward, offering a firm handshake. "We've been putting in the effort," he said, his tone friendly but measured. For a while the conversation remained light, filled with small talk about crops, animals, and the unpredictable weather. Clara tried to stay focused, answering questions with care, but she noticed the way Mr. Carmichael's eyes lingered a little too long, the way his questions seemed to probe beyond the surface. She felt a tightening in her chest, a sense of unease she could not explain. After a polite farewell, she turned to Ethan. "He's persistent," she said quietly, her voice betraying her discomfort. Ethan nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Don't worry about him," he said gently. "We know the truth about this place, and that's what matters." But Clara knew it wasn't that simple. Carmichael's curiosity had sparked a fear she had tried to keep buried. What if someone else discovered her secret? What if years of careful hiding unraveled in a single conversation? She forced herself to focus on chores, to busy her mind with the physical work of the ranch, yet the anxiety lingered, a quiet hum beneath the rhythm of their days.
Over the next few weeks, the tension began to affect Clara in ways she hadn't anticipated.
She found herself more withdrawn at times, less willing to share stories or moments of laughter. Ethan noticed the change immediately. During one evening, as they repaired a gate near the edge of the property, he asked gently, "Clara, is something bothering you?" Clara froze, her hands gripping the hammer tightly. She looked at him, searching for a reason to deflect, to brush it off. "No," she said softly, forcing a small smile. "Just tired, I guess." "It's been a long day." Ethan didn't push, but his gaze lingered, steady and concerned. "You know you don't have to carry everything alone," he said. "I'm here, and I want to help in every way I can." His words struck a chord deep within her. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he could handle whatever truth she carried. But fear was stronger than hope. She shook her head gently. I can manage." Really, that night, as she lay awake in her small bedroom, Clara replayed the conversation over and over in her mind. Ethan had a way of speaking that made her feel both comforted and exposed, as though he could see the very essence of her soul. She knew that the longer she delayed, the harder it would be to speak. And yet, the fear of judgment, of losing the only person who had truly come alongside her in years, made her hesitate. Days passed, and the unease grew. Clara became more cautious in her interactions with neighbors, avoiding unnecessary visits and keeping her explanations brief. Ethan, however, remained patient, offering his support quietly and consistently. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the kitchen after a long day of work, he brought up a subject he had been thinking about. "Clara," he began softly, "I can tell there's something on your mind. You don't have to tell me everything all at once, but I want you to know, whatever it is, we can face it together." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her cup of tea. She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of judgment, any trace of impatience. There was none. Only patience, understanding, and a quiet strength that made her feel both safe and vulnerable at the same time. She wanted to speak, to finally release the burden she had carried alone for so long. But fear held her tongue. Before she could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. A rider approached from the neighboring ranch, waving and calling out. It was Mr. Carmichael again. Clara's stomach tightened at the sight of him. She hurried to the door, motioning Ethan to follow.
Mrs. Hayes, he said breathlessly as he dismounted, I think you should know.
I found something while working near the old fence line. It might be important for the ranch. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She knew immediately that this could be connected to her secret, though she had hoped it would remain hidden a little longer. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. What did you find? She asked cautiously. Mr. Carmichael held up a small, worn piece of paper, weathered by time and the elements. It looks like an old note, maybe a record of something from years ago. I didn't read it fully, didn't want to assume, but I thought you should see it. Ethan stepped forward, taking the paper from Mr. Carmichael and examining it carefully. Clara's hands were clammy, her mind racing with possibilities. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized that the note was connected to the decision she had tried to forget, the mistake she had made, the secret she had buried so deeply. I need to see this alone, she said softly, taking the paper from Ethan. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the calm she tried to maintain. She retreated to the kitchen table, spreading the note out in front of her. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of guilt and fear. Carmichael waited quietly, sensing that this was a moment Clara needed to face on her own. She read the note again and again, each word a reminder of the past she had tried to escape. And yet, as she sat there, she realized something important. She didn't have to face this alone. Ethan was here. He had been patient, kind, and steady throughout everything. Perhaps, if she trusted him, she could finally confront the consequences of her actions and begin to heal. With a deep breath, Clara looked up at Ethan. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but filled with resolve. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "Something from my past. Something I've been afraid to share." Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I'm listening," he said simply. "Take your time." For the first time in years, Clara felt the weight of her secret begin to lift, not because it was gone, but because she was no longer carrying it alone. The words she had feared would destroy her were finally spoken, and though the path ahead remained uncertain, she knew that with Ethan by her side she could face whatever came next. Clara sat at the kitchen table, the worn piece of paper before her, Ethan by her side. Her fingers trembled as she smoothed it flat, as if making the paper lie straight could somehow make the past easier to face. For years this secret had been a shadow in her life, one she had buried beneath work, routine, and the loneliness of widowhood. Now, with Ethan sitting quietly across from her, she realized she no longer had to carry it alone. "I made a mistake a long time ago," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "Something I thought I could fix. Something I hoped no one would ever know." She paused, taking a deep breath as she tried to summon the courage to continue. "It's about the ranch and about me. I did something that hurt people, though I'd never meant to, and I've carried it with me ever since." Ethan reached across the table, placing a steady hand over hers. His presence was calm, grounding, and it gave her the courage she needed to keep speaking. "Clara," he said gently, "whatever it is, we'll face it together. I'm here." Tears pricked at her eyes as she told him the truth, the details of a business decision she had made years ago that had backfired, causing a neighbor's financial trouble. She explained how she had tried to make amends privately, paying back as much as she could, and helping in ways that went unnoticed. She had hidden the mistake out of fear, guilt, and pride, convinced that revealing it would ruin her reputation and the ranch she loved so dearly. Ethan listened in silence, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, she braced herself for anger, disappointment, or perhaps a judgment she could not bear. Instead, he simply nodded. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said softly. "I know it wasn't easy, and I can see that you've been trying to make it right all along. That matters more than anything else." Clara blinked, surprised at his response. She had expected reproach, maybe even silence. But here was someone who saw her efforts, her intentions, and the courage it had taken to carry this burden for so long. A wave of relief washed over her, mingling with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. For the next few days, Clara and Ethan worked together to address the situation more openly. They reached out to the neighbor who had been affected, explaining the steps Clara had already taken and offering further support. The response was surprisingly understanding. The neighbor appreciated the honesty and effort, and though there was some lingering tension, it was clear that the relationship could be repaired. The experience brought Clara a sense of liberation she had not expected. By confronting the secret and dealing with the consequences, she felt lighter, freer. The ranch, once burdened with the weight of her past mistakes, seemed to thrive in response. Crops grew greener, the animals healthier, and the fences more solid than ever before. Clara realized that facing her past had not destroyed her. It had strengthened her, and it had allowed her to fully accept the support and companionship Ethan offered. Ethan, too, noticed the change. Clara moved with more confidence, smiled more freely, and engaged with the neighbors without fear or hesitation. He admired her resilience and the way she had faced her mistake with honesty and courage. For him, this was not just about helping with the ranch. It was about witnessing a remarkable woman reclaim her life and her future. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Clara and Ethan grew stronger. Their work together had always been steady and reliable, but now it was filled with a deeper connection. They shared quiet breakfasts on the porch, laughed over small mishaps in the barn, and celebrated the little victories of ranch life, like a fence repaired, a new calf born, or a field of crops thriving against the odds. Each shared moment strengthened their partnership and deepened the trust that had begun to form from the very first day Ethan arrived. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with warm shades of orange and pink, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch in comfortable silence. The air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly turned earth and wildflowers from the fields beyond. Clara felt a sense of peace she had not known since Jacob's passing. The ranch was thriving. Her secret was no longer a shadow over her life, and she had someone she could truly trust. "I never thought things could feel like this again," she said softly, her voice carrying just above the gentle breeze. "I mean, after everything, I didn't think I'd ever feel hope the way I do now." Ethan smiled, reaching for her hand. "Sometimes it takes facing the past to truly appreciate the present," he said. "You've done that, Clara. You've faced it, and you've come through stronger. The ranch, your life, it's all brighter because of your courage." Clara squeezed his hand, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "And you've helped more than I can ever say," she whispered. "Not just with the ranch, but with me. You've been patient, understanding, everything I didn't know I needed." Ethan's smile grew gentle and steady. "We make a good team," he said. And not just for the ranch. The weeks continued with a sense of renewal. Clara began to open her home more to the neighbors, sharing stories and laughter, inviting them to see the progress of the ranch. Her relationship with Ethan grew naturally, without rush or expectation, built on shared trust and mutual respect. They discovered the joy of companionship, the comfort of knowing someone would stand by you through challenges, and the quiet satisfaction of shared work. Evenings often found them sitting on the porch after long days, watching the sun set and reflecting on the day's accomplishments. Sometimes they spoke quietly of the future, the possibilities for the ranch, plans to expand or improve, and dreams that had once seemed impossible. Other times they simply sat in silence, content in each other's presence, letting the calm of the land around them fill the space between words. Clara realized that life at the ranch was no longer just about survival. It had become a life of hope, connection, and growth. The mistakes of the past had not disappeared, but they had been acknowledged and addressed, leaving her stronger, wiser, and more capable of embracing the future. She no longer feared judgment, for she had faced it, and she no longer feared loneliness, for she had found someone she could truly trust. Ethan had proven himself not just a helper, but a partner in every sense. His patience, understanding, and steady presence had shown Clara that she could open her heart again, that she could share her burdens and her joys without fear. Together, they had rebuilt more than just the ranch. They had rebuilt the sense of possibility in Clara's life. One morning, as they worked side by side in the fields, Clara paused to take in the view. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the land. The animals grazed peacefully. The fences stood strong, and the crops swayed gently in the breeze. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the work, for the land, and for the man who had come into her life unexpectedly and helped her rediscover hope. Ethan glanced at her, noticing the serene expression on her face. "It looks like the ranch is finally where it should be," he said, his voice quiet but full of satisfaction. Clara smiled, nodding. "Yes," she said softly, "and it feels like my life is finally where it should be too." In that moment, the worries of the past seemed distant. The secret that had once weighed so heavily on her heart was no longer a burden. She had faced it, shared it, and found understanding and support instead of fear and judgment. The ranch was thriving, and so was she. Over time, the partnership between Clara and Ethan grew into something deeper. They shared their dreams, their plans, and their hopes for the future. The ranch, once a symbol of struggle and loss, had become a place of renewal, growth, and possibility. The bond they had formed through work, trust, and understanding became a foundation for something lasting, built on honesty, respect, and shared experiences. As the seasons changed, the Hayes Ranch continued to flourish. Crops were harvested, animals thrived, and the fences and buildings stood firm against time and weather. Clara and Ethan faced challenges together, but now they faced them as partners, not as isolated individuals. The ranch was more than a home. It was a testament to resilience, trust, and the strength that comes from facing the past and embracing the future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara and Ethan stood together on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and purple. Clara felt the sense of peace and fulfillment she had not thought possible after years of loss and fear. The ranch was thriving, her secret had been faced, and she had found someone she could trust and rely on completely. Ethan turned to her, his eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "We've come a long way," he said quietly. Clara nodded, squeezing his hand. "Yes," she replied, "and I wouldn't have done it without you." In the quiet of that evening, surrounded by the land she loved and the man she had come to trust, Clara realized that life could be good again. The mistakes of the past had not defined her. They had taught her resilience, courage, and the value of trust. The ranch had been saved not just by work and determination, but by honesty, partnership, and the willingness to face what had been hidden. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to look forward with hope. The ranch was thriving. Her life had purpose, and she had found someone to share it with. The future was uncertain, as it always is, but for the first time, she felt ready to embrace it fully, knowing she did not have to face it alone. And in that moment, standing on the porch as the stars began to emerge in the night sky, Clara felt a quiet joy she had not thought possible, the joy of redemption, of trust, and of a life rebuilt from hardship into something beautiful.